My guest today is Michael Cassau. Michael is a founder and a member of the board of directors of a company called Grover. It's the largest tech subscription company in Europe. Grover's last fundraising was a little less than 2 years ago, where they raised over 330 million with a valuation of more than a billion. Thanks a lot for coming to the HoldCo Builder show, Michael.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Before we get started, I know it was almost 2 years ago, but what did you actually do on a day when you raised 330 million? Yes, it was 110 million in equity and 220 million in debt, total 330. But what did you do? How did you feel? Do you remember the day?
Well, celebrating, of course, shortly, yeah, and then thinking about how can we make free NFTs? NFT were a thing back then, but we distributed NFTs with a Grover unicorn to our team, and how could we publish that? I think we switched immediately into, okay, let's distribute free NFTs. There still is one. But no, all jokes aside, I think we definitely celebrated for a short time, but we're not the party people there too much. So we didn't celebrate. We didn't have this huge thing, but we definitely celebrated with the team, said, hey, wonderful, and let's move on. Yeah, I mean, with fundraising comes also responsibility, right? So you're moving to the next phase of growth and of your company.
Okay. So can you please share your background all the way from university till the day you started Grover?
Yeah, sure. So look, I studied economics and law contemporaneously, so simultaneously, whatever. And I worked at Goldman Sachs for roughly 3 years in London. Then moved to Berlin to try out the Rocket Internet thing, and then left Rocket after 6 months and started Grover. And the idea is really about problem solving, a problem that I encountered when moving from London to Berlin in that summer of 2014, which is I needed to spend a lot of cash, personal money for furniture and new tech equipment and so forth. But my initial intention, at least, was only to stay there for a limited amount of time. So I thought it's really inefficient to either commit for a long time to finance these things that exceeds my usage time, or to spend all the cash up front. So I wanted something that is time bound, where I spend, for the time I'm actually using it. So that was kind of the birth idea of Grover. And I started the company working on it in April 2015, and then the official launch was in June 2015.
So you mentioned your time in Rocket Internet. It's a massive German success story. I've been reading about it, but can you share what did you learn while working there, and how was it for you?
So yeah, I really enjoyed the Rocket time, right? And it was a stark contrast to London, right? So London was you sit in front of screen, do Excel and so forth, 24 hours a day. And at Rocket, I was doing a rollout for a company that wanted to internationalize quickly. So I was spending, every month in a different country, different city, and so forth. And I think the number one thing I enjoyed doing and learned a lot was the business development part, where you meet business partners, whether it's in Singapore or Australia or anywhere else. And I thought, regardless of country, regardless of city, everybody was always open to the business. And I thought that was a really interesting insight. It's not so culture bound, but people just want to do business. And if you have an interesting business proposal, you can do business anywhere globally in the world. So I think this is the thing that I enjoyed most. What I learned also, I think the most, is that it's relatively it's possible to do real business globally quickly and really produce value immediately. So that's I think the number one thing that is kind of the takeaway here.
Okay. Now, early days of Grover. Do you remember first 2-3 years? What were some pivotal moments and lessons you learned? Because this is the period where I am with my small businesses, and it's always what I've seen is it can be very tough when it comes to trying different products and services, what works, what doesn't work. And obviously, as you've raised a lot of capital, you probably had this. You really nailed the product market fit. So, how was the first, second, third year in
Yeah.
Grover?
So I think, look, at the beginning, the you always have a problem with the chicken and egg, right? Especially if you do kind of a marketplace model almost, right? So at Grover, we need equity to deploy debt, and we need debt to grow, and then in order to get more equity, we need to grow. So it's a circle. So that's the first thing. You got to break the egg, as one of another person has said that I don't know what his name was, but you got to break the egg. You got to get that circle kind of going. And I think this is what we spent the most time on, is raise equity, but not having the debt, then grow, and then raising the debt despite, having less equity now. And then that's the first thing. And the second thing is that you want to establish kind of a company, rather than just working at something yourself, right? So I think when equity is low and you really want to, you're really frugal in terms of your spend, the number one mistake I think you can make, and I see this now when I'm doing new things, is on the one side you want to spend always as little as possible. On the other side, that means you start doing things that that aren't going to bring you forward a lot because you do too much yourself. You want to spend too much. You want to save too much in a way of money, and you always have to fight against the scarcity mindset. If you want to, be super frugal, then suddenly. So this is also kind of a growth issue. Is the balancing act between, okay, what brings you forward, what do you do to create growth, right? Without overspending, but also without getting trapped in the scarcity mindset, I think. So these are the two things, creating the wheel and making sure you grow fast enough without overspending.
Have the all fundraising rounds been equity plus debt, or in the beginning it was just equity?
In the beginning, it was just equity. And then after the equity came, the asset-backed debt. And after the asset-backed debt came the equity. And then so it's one after the other.
I'm asking because in the consumer loan company we are building at the moment, it's pretty much the same thing which you just mentioned, the debt and the equity ratio. And again, we are in early days portfolio, 4 million euros, and no one, like the big institutions, they don't really care about us. At the same time, we are a bit too large for those smaller players, so it's a very interesting phase for us.
You got to make it happen.
So growing the business, I have a question in here. I want to ask: how do you build a company in which investors want to invest 330 million?
Well, I think one thing that is true for every fundraise is that regardless of the amount that you raise, it must always look very small with regard to the company that it's being deployed in, right? Because you're never giving up 100% of your company. You're always giving up only 10% or 15% or some amount that you find is reasonable. So the company must always be years ahead, many steps ahead of the fundraise amount. When you do a seed round, you raise 1 million or 2, and your valuation is small versus you raising hundreds of million and your valuation being big. The relationship actually should improve over time. The potential of the company, the size of the company that people can imagine or see based on the older you are, the more data you obviously going to provide and the traction and so forth. But the trajectory of the company must be a lot more credible with this fundraising amount. And the fundraising amount must look very small relative to the potential of the company that it can create. Right. So this is kind of, I hope that makes sense, but that's the number one thing, is that the valuation that you can create with this capital must be a magnitude larger than the valuation of the company that this capital is kind of invested into. And how do you do that? Well, you do that with a solid story, a solid trajectory, solid KPIs, early traction, and so forth. And then depending on your stage, the KPIs and the traction that you will have to show and look at are just differ over time.
You said we were talking before that Grover is a the largest in Europe in his category. Uh, how do you stay ahead of the competition?
Yeah, competition is one of these things. I think you're aware. You should be aware of your competition in a way, but then otherwise, you should worry about your customers and delivering a top service and making sure you have good retention and so forth. Because what the competition does or not does, I mean, you don't care. What you do care is what do your customers do. So if you then, if your KPIs start to suffer because reason ABC, let's say, and one of the reason is, hey, 40% of the customers, I mean, this is a made up numbers, but choosing competition instead of you, your customer acquisition costs go up. Then you start looking at, okay, what's the issue here at hand? But other than that, you shouldn't indulge into what other.
So uh, last year November, you stepped down as a CEO. Uh, can you share why did you make this decision, and what you're planning to do next?
Sure. So look, I think Grover in the upcoming phase of growth needs and wants some leadership and consolidation. I think also in the existing markets, right? So you want to have a bit more of a conservative, longer term profile and capital deployment, etc. So for me, I think finding something new is now the name of the game, and that's what I'm looking for to do actually.
I want to talk a little bit about the fundraising, because this is something I'm responsible of the company we are building, and within the next 5 years, this is something I have to become very very good at it. So it's always good to ask from someone who has done it. What advice would you give to entrepreneurs seeking funding and this debt and equity ratio type funding in this, I would say, competitive environment with extremely high interest rates?
Yeah, I think the high interest rate environment is always an issue, right? So in my kind of, well, let's say 3/4 of the time in which I was fundraising um, where in an environment where a good story, a good vision, a good strategy, a good picture of was the key, was very important, right? So you had to, I mean, it still applies today, right? But that was the number one thing. The number one thing were the future profits that this company could make after IPO were the selling items. You will never talk about current profits. So small profitability today or before IPO would reduce equity value. So you always need to adjust what maximizes equity value. And in the current market, the focus, I mean, you still got to show the inevitability of the success of the company that you're leading and you have created. Like, why will this be huge? I mean, this is the problem. This is the market. This is what's happening. This is the solution. And it needs to happen. It must happen. There's no way around it. This just needs to enter the brain of the people you're talking to, right? This complete hotness and excitement that you have. This communication must translate. But also, in addition, now you have to show that, by the way, the numbers are working today, right? So people now have witnessed too many companies that were very good on the story, but ended up in bankruptcy. It's a Bird, for instance, the scooter company. How many people thought that Bird is going to be larger than Uber just 3 years ago? Now they're gone. WeWork tried to IPO 2 years ago at a 46 billion valuation. Now all they have left is, so people have seen too many now with the high interest environment where you had spectacular founders, right? But the company ended up nowhere because the story didn't translate into KPIs, into unit economics. So investors today are looking at unit economics heavily, although the story needs to make sense, obviously. They need to get hot on the story, but it's like, okay, well, let's turn on the lights as well and see whether or not, and then this is critical. So if you have these two things, I think things will work out, and the greatest companies raise capital, like always.
Do you have some funny stories which you like to share out of all of those fundraising. All the fundraising journey. What I mean in here, last week, for example, I do a lot of outreach, cold calls to potential investors because we are raising bonds. Our equity side is covered, but we raise bonds, securities, interest rates from 12 to 14. So I do a lot of calls. Yes, last week I called one wealthy individual who runs an oil company, and we were talking, and I didn't mention any amounts, and he said that maybe he would be interested in putting a very small little amount of money in what we do. And we kept talking, and it turned out this little in his mind, it was like a half a million US dollars. So we started laughing because I thought the little is like 50,000 or something. So do you have any stories like this which come up at the moment?
Sure. Look, I think the more you do, the more stories you will create, right? And every company or every fundraiser is special, right? So remember well, everyone. I think Series A 2018 was particular, definitely because so at the beginning, always everything had to come together at the same time. Remember, so if one thing falls apart, you're like, okay, I need to start from scratch, right? So I think we had a debt provider fall off in short term, like a week before signing the equity, and then we needed to reconvene kind of on the debt side and come up with a new deal within a week and so forth. So it was pretty stressful, but we made it happen. Yeah, I thought there are always things like that that happen as you raise capital. I think it's nothing special, obviously, but in a way, for every founder, it's part of the journey.
So how did you approach building relationships with investors, and maybe some tricks some tricks there which you have seen worked really well? For example, from my side, I always I didn't think about this, but now what I know is I already introduced myself to them because I know one day I really have to ask from them. Before I used to think that when I need something, I'll go and introduce. Now it's more about giving them overview, giving them updates on how things are going, not really asking that we are raising money and 6 months, 9 months from today, I know I can go back because they know me already. And this was the big lesson which I think I've learned over the past 6 months to really introduce myself and what we do already before I'm asking something from them. So what about you? Is there any particular tips which thinking back you can say that okay, this worked really well?
Yeah. So look, I think what you said is that people need to know you before you actually raise. I think it's critical. I think it's also critical to like each other, right? You got to have a relationship with the people, because ultimately you don't want to raise from people that you don't want to work with, right? So you and vice versa. It's going to be a long time. So you got to have these two relationships. But then I think thirdly, ultimately it's all professional, right? You may like each other, you may send around updates, but nobody really is going to do any business with you unless you have some sort of traction, right? Something needs to happen. Someone needs to get super excited, and then everybody else get excited, right? So, and then if you tick the boxes on, yeah, this is a good guy, I like working with him and so forth, and or people can also say, yeah, he's crazy, but I mean, this is a one of, I mean, it really doesn't matter. You just need to be kind of in the forefront of the people, and you should have some traction somewhere. I think this part of investors reacting very strong to signals remains very, very true, because there's a lot of insecurity amongst VCs. Nobody knows who's going to be successful, who's not. What they know is that you got a term sheet from Sequoia, and then all right, let's go. That's it. Yeah, that's a signal everybody would react to. Really.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about mistakes because when learning from others' mistakes, you can avoid at least few of them. So looking back, what do you consider the biggest mistake you faced while building Crover, and what did you learn from it?
Look, I think the biggest mistakes, and I'm going to talk about in general, because everybody makes their own kind of learnings, and so now I will be super picky and selective with regard to investor selection. Like, you want to participate in my new startup, I mean, the terms are going to be very different. I think, look, this is what I want, and if you say no, I'm fine with it. And I think founders, especially at the beginning, just want to build a company, and they accept too much stuff. It's like, hey, if this happens or that happens, then I think founders get screwed too often, and I think the power balance has shifted, right? So I think you see, I've read yesterday something where LPs pressure their GPs a lot, and GPs now get pressured by founders on top of that. So terms are improving. The founders need to step up their game a little bit here and not get, screwed. I mean, don't do business with investors that where the terms, I mean, we never did that, but where the terms are, you think are weird. We saw a couple of weird term sheets, and luckily we said no always. But I think not raising capital just to build your baby. It's like, hey, it's okay. I'm gonna do it. It's gonna be great. Just say no and try to do it without these guys until you have something that you really like with people you really want to be in business with that align with your mission, your vision, with yourself for a very long time.
Okay, a little bit about the general insights, because you've been just having this 8-year journey pretty much. What do you know now that you wished you had known when you started Grover?
Well, that's a good question, because at the beginning when I started Grover, right, I had zero idea, I think, about people management. So I think that's the biggest learning is, there are different stages of, how you build a business and how you manage people, or who are you going to interact with whom. So obviously at the beginning you do everything yourself. You have a team of 10, and you're like a coach a little bit. You have a team of 50, then you have a layer one in between yourself and so forth. So I think this is critical. I think one of these mistakes for me back then at the very beginning was, a small team, and I hired like C-level folks into it, but they wouldn't work by themselves a little bit, right? They would try to manage people, but those people, they weren't there that they would want to manage, right? So, and this immediately creates a discrepancy between expectations, where it's like, hey, I thought you're going to be a super strong individual contributor, but the person thought, or the person's strength is managing large teams, right? So you got to be really aware of the person's strength, your company needs, and the optimal match between these three things. So you don't want to have an accountant as a salesperson, or a salesperson as an accountant, right? Similarly, you don't want to have a super high level manager as an individual contributor, or an individual contributor as a manager who cannot step up things. So this kind of things is a science in and of itself, and I think founders need to be aware of it and optimize a team allocation, team productivity quite a bit.
During this time, did you reach out to someone asking for help, advice when it comes to people management, or you just figured it out pretty much everything yourself?
No, I reached out to a few, yeah, and I was like, okay, I need to figure this out, right? I tried to read, books and MBA books and all of that. I thought it was not interesting, but I found, maybe I can share the marketing here for that. But I thought one thing very, very interesting, and that's a book called Organizational Physics by Lex Sisney. I can only highly recommend. And then I subsequently also worked with the author of that book. And that gave me the necessary insights early on. And they proved to be true and right, at least for the setup of my company. And I'm going to reutilize that. But essentially is that, the depiction of an organization as a physical unit that can either decay in entropy or succeed in cohesion. And the question is, how do you create cohesion? How do you avoid entropy and so forth? So I can only recommend that book for all the people out here.
When building Grover, let's say there was a big mess going on. Who was the person or people you were calling to or writing to? Were they mentors, friends who are building companies, entrepreneurs? Who were the people?
To who I was seeking advice from?
Yes, you had some. Maybe you were expanding too quickly, you're growing too quickly. Some building business, there is always something going on during the tough days, especially. What did you do?
Sure. Yeah. Well, you want to make sure you have a good community of other founders, whether it's in the city you're at or in other cities, obviously, right? So you want to have that exchange with other folks. But what you will learn really quickly is that you're pretty much on your own, right? So all the other founders are on their own too, and then you can exchange your issues. But they're very similar issues always. But we have a strong kind of founder community in Berlin. It's very easy to exchange there, but also you got to have founder friends, because no one else can relate except other founders.
And building Grover, who and what has been the what has have had the most significant influence on your journey? Because I believe we all have some people we look up to, some companies we look up to. Uh, who and what was it for you?
Well, for me, it was always to build a very large market leading consumer brand. And if of all the companies that I think did it really well, I think Airbnb stands out, right? So I thought, okay, they really penetrated consumer mindset globally, and I want Grover to do the same in a way, to be this household name globally. I think Uber did it really well as well. So I think a couple of companies that in the consumer space have succeeded tremendously, and I think those two that I always enjoyed are Uber and Airbnb, and I think they're very different, right? Airbnb had this very conciliant, all-encompassing brand and founders, and then Uber was just about hardcore execution always, at least until Travis was there. So those two companies, I think, were always, were always kind of around. So when it was about brand, we wanted to build a consumer brand. You said, look how great Airbnb is doing it, right? So I think these are definitely two companies that are standing out, that have executed it really, really well in the consumer space.
A little bit about your personal life while building the business. Uh, how do you balance the demands of being the founder with your personal life and maybe some habits when you were doing this?
Yeah, so I think as a founder, you definitely need to derive energy from what you're doing. It cannot be a drain of energy. So for me, I get energy from it. I get energy from dealing with all of that until 2 a.m. in the morning and so forth. So this it has to be it. If it doesn't give you energy, then you're in the wrong space. On the other hand, you definitely want to make sure that you are, balancing yourself out with whatever else gives you energy. So I also get energy from spending time with my family, being a father that is true to his children. I want to make sure I do, I spend the right time with them. So, and that's then about focus. I mean, your kids go to school, they go here, they do this and that, and but the time you do spend together, you want to be there. You don't want to be on your phone, right? You don't want to be all in your brain thinking about the business. And by the way, you're not going to always succeed. I mean, you can succeed in putting your phone away. You have to actually do that. It's totally unacceptable to be on your phone if you're with your kids, at least as much as possible. But what's really difficult is to get out of your own head. I think that's actually impossible to not think about your business like all the time. That it's really it rarely happens, maybe for an hour or so. So yeah, I think apart from the usual, you got to do the things or whatever. I think all founders you are on a journey, and if you're on a journey, you just have to do whatever you're doing all the time.
When it comes to the busiest days, weeks, months, how was your schedule? How was your typical day?
Well, I think the busiest times always during particular projects, right? Like a fundraise or a country launch or something that is really happening right now. And yeah, I think it's always like 8 a.m. in the morning until 2 a.m. at night. Then you get some 5 hours of sleep and so forth, and then you have a coffee in the morning with your family, and then you just go on.
Was it actually that crazy from 8 a.m. to 2 a.m.?
Yeah, but for me it's okay. Look, I thought I studied two subjects. There was also you know, instead of the one subject you study two, that's a lot. And then I worked at Goldman, and it's also, 2 a.m. always. And the same applies to kind of startup. I mean, you just want to make sure you get some sleep, like 5 or 6 hours. I think so long as that is good enough, you can do whatever you want in the time in between. Subject to coffee or Diet Coke in my case. I drink a lot of Diet Coke.
During these tough times, did you have any time to work out, to read, to gather new ideas, or you were just on the same cycle every day for weeks, for months?
You're typically in the tunnel. You don't have time for anything else. Maybe on the weekends you can get a workout, but apart from that, there's nothing else.
Can you share a memorable, like a aha moment during this 8-year period of building Grover? Something which comes up.
Sure. So I think the biggest aha moment we had, was that the business started as a pay-as-you-go, cancel-anytime subscription company, actually. And it evolved to something much better than that, where people can now or could choose now subscription periods, commit to longer, and instead benefit from a cheaper price. So that was a big aha moment, actually, for the company. And it happened in 2018. So it increased our retention, it increased our profitability, and it removed the core issue which we had, was that the spikes were too large, right? So people who wanted to commit for long periods of time, often for them the prices were too high, and people who just wanted to rent something over the summer, they were willing to pay more, but we wouldn't charge them. So splitting this up, I think, was a big aha moment for the company, and something that kind of altered the trajectory of the business to where it is today, building something very in high demand with very high product market fit. We also surveyed our customers, by the way, on product market fit. That was the second thing that was really important. We asked our customers, how disappointed would you be if you could no longer use Grover? And then we also asked them, why do you use Grover? And we gave them several options. And based on those answers, we found out what are the reasons to use Grover that are the most important to the people, versus what are the reasons to use Grover where if people have those reasons, they just don't care about the company. So, for example, people thought that try before you buy was a good reason to try to use Grover, but turned out that people really didn't care if Grover existed or not. It's like, okay, whatever. However, people who would use Grover in order to replace financing for them, right? Or have a really great alternative, they really cared about the company. They're like, hey, this is, the service. So the result for us, or the implication for us from that result, was a big aha moment where we stopped any communication with regard to try before you buy, for instance. And also the pricing changed. And all of the communication went into long-term subscriptions, long-term offers. And we improved those offers also as a result. So these two were big aha moments in the trajectory of the company, and they are significant kind of cornerstones and building blocks of Grover today.
Are you more of a product guy or a visionary?
Did you say product?
Product guy, yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm more on the visionary side, I think. For me, the product, needs to work, right? It needs to be good and great, and so forth. But I really don't care what is the button color.
Few more questions about the Grover period. First of all, if you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice when starting Grover, what would it be?
Make sure your tech is the best it can be at the very beginning, and don't rush. Don't do Salesforce. Don't do the Salesforce thing. But that's a very specific thing, right? But I think we're still trying to get rid of Salesforce at Grover, or the company's trying to do it, and it's just it's the tech legacy you build early on, right? It's going to stay with the company forever. Although there was no other way at the time, right? You had to do it. It was so immediately scalable. But then people struggle a lot with it for a very long time, especially if you stop investing in it, because every CTO thinks, oh, this thing doesn't work. We need to do it better, and then they start working on something that is better, but it kind of this other thing kind of never gets done. It's just, and then you just have a lot of resources in the alternative. Let's build it up. So I think on the tech side, especially, you need to make a clear decision. What's the direction, and then scale this one thing rather than building something that is better in parallel to have something that is old and working, and then you suddenly have two systems kind of in place.
Can you explain what did the Salesforce do?
So I think the Salesforce, especially in the early days, is great for automatization of processes, right? So let's say you have, you need to ship things, you have a customer. That there's no better software actually than Salesforce to automate our workflows early on, right? You have one developer, two developers, they just get everything done very quickly. You can ship products, you can deal with customers, many different things, and there are Salesforce development agencies. Now, if you scale 1,000x from there, the system will have some limitations. So you want to have something that is better and different. Now, because Salesforce is so scalable early on, you suddenly need to build everything anew, right? And that's where you need to make a decision. I think at the early days is, are you going to use Salesforce for workflow automatization, or are you going to build something from scratch immediately? And I think this is one of the things that even today would be like, okay, starting something new. I think going with Salesforce still is an interesting option, but you have many more options today than you had, let's say, in 2015, especially when you start out for workflow automatization, especially in operations-heavy businesses.
How has entrepreneurship and building Grover changed your life and changed your family life?
So I think for myself, I found out that this is the only thing that I want to do. This is the only thing that gives me energy. And I also found out, I think, that I need to do things that give me energy, right? So now when I'm looking for something new, I'm looking for the electricity plug, right? Where's the energy? What is the thing that I can plug my hand, my finger, my brain into, and then just get that eternal energy for a upcoming potentially very long journey. So you want to make sure that you do whatever gives you energy. I think this is the number one thing. And actually, I didn't know that. Obviously, university was great. I studied with high energy because I wanted to accomplish something, but I never knew, am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? And so forth. And so I think entrepreneurship gives you a clear idea about what do you want to do, how do you do it, and you come to realize that that's the only thing that you want to do actually relatively quickly.
Does energy mean passion for you, or you think these are actually separate
Yeah.
things?
Well, I think, look, the people are using all the time some words.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then nobody knows what does it mean. So what does passion mean? Yeah, it means probably I don't know what, right? So what does passion mean? What does it mean? So I think you got to have something that you are really hot for, right? It's just you see it, but it's not there yet, and then you want to make it happen. And this I want to make it happen thing is really ultimately critically important to you. That it gives you that energy for a long journey. But passion, I don't know what passion means actually. What does passion mean? It's like I think people. This is what people mean when they say passion. Is like you got to do something that gives you energy, right? But other than that, um, I wouldn't have a different definition of that word.
I think when it comes to passion, uh, when analyzing my own life and what you've done probably as well, looking back of certain period, whether it's a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, you have certain days or periods thinking back that okay, this was a really awesome time, and if you actually go into detail and you start looking like what were you doing, then you start looking at okay, this is something I really enjoy doing. For example, this podcast, I was really afraid English is not my first language. How should I write people like you to invite? Why you should even come? You're super busy. All these fears and stuff. And now, as I've been doing, this is going to be episode 20. Looking back, doing 20 episodes, it's awesome stuff. I was just dumb enough because I was afraid. I was afraid is a right word of I'm not I'm not the guy who should be doing this. But now I'm like, I will be doing that for a long, long time, because the last 6 months it has been one of the best times of my life. Seriously.
I lost you there on the last 30 seconds.
Ah, yeah. So what I want to say is, being old enough. I just turned 30. I once in a while take this few hours a day to analyze where have I been the happiest. And from there, I actually see that during those happiest moments, I probably had the highest energy as well. And sometimes looking at this, I'm like, this is probably the quote unquote passion, something which I really enjoy doing. It gives me energy. And that's why I was asking this question from you, that do you think the energy equals passion?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I think it's also different people, right? If you were to do something now that gives you no energy, you wouldn't enjoy it, and you would do it not great, right? It's just you feel differently, like, right? But if you do something that gives you that energy that you feel, um, you feel strong. You're like a, you know, you're on the field like Djokovic. You're like, all right, let's kill it. And so I think everybody needs to find the energy element when doing something, and you can. It's obviously something else for everybody, but you got to make sure that at least you have that recognition and the ability to screen, the field of opportunities for whatever is that element that gives you that high impact feeling where you're like, okay, I'm moving mountains. This is what I need to feel. So this is what I can go ahead with, and this is how I want to spend the next 10 years or the rest of my life feeling. Right. So I think this awareness is critical.
You brought out Djokovic, the 24 something time Grand Slam champion. I'm big fan of tennis myself. Djokovic said, I think 15 years ago, when he had like, I don't know, maybe 5 Grand Slams, like what's the most important thing for you? What's the passion? What gives you energy? And he said that hitting the ball. That's it. It's just
Yeah,
hitting the
yeah, I
ball.
read it.
And now
Yeah,
15 years later, the guy is just still hitting the ball. So my
yeah,
question for you, what is this thing for you, hitting the ball? What gives you energy? What is your passion?
yeah. I think it's the conversion from thoughts to reality. That's
Mhm.
that's I think the number one thing is that you think it, you see it, and then it materializes in the reality, and then you think it again, and it materializes again, and then you think it a year or two ahead, you think it 50 years ahead, 20, 10, and so forth. So for me, I think it's the kind of realization, the materialization of thoughts, creating something out of nothing that makes me come to life. That is the core thing here.
If you want to share, what are you planning to create next? Because the Grover period, I think the intense period is, I wouldn't say over, but maybe over for you for some time at least. What is next for you? What are you going to create if you want to share?
Yeah, sure. Look, I'm looking at a couple of things, right? I'm meeting a lot of people here in the States now, trying to understand what is everybody kind of working on. Obviously, in the Valley, everybody's full of AI right now. It's like, oh my God, right? So, but I think for me, what's really interesting right now is this entire HoldCo builders community. That's what I'm currently most excited about. I think there's so much opportunity in that space, and it's a lot of individuals out there, but it's a completely decentralized industry today. And I think maybe I should look at it from a tech startup perspective, and this is exactly what I'm doing. Is that okay? How would I do it if I were to do it a tech startup way? How does that look like? So that's, I think, something that is currently interesting me.
You mentioned you're in States at the moment, but you've been living a long time in Europe. Comparing this to, which one you prefer at the moment, 10 years from now, and why?
Yeah, so sometimes I think my journey in Europe is so I'm done with Europe in a way, and the US is the future. And it's a different mentality. Everything is faster and everything is more in vibe where I am at. Um, Also today, I think I feel it, and I like the United States a lot. So for me, um, also bringing Grover to the US and so forth, and has been always very important. I think United States is a great country, great people with the great energy. Everybody's open, to embrace the future, and has little, cultural baggage in terms of insecurity, uncertainties. Regardless of what you read on Twitter, the future is always what Americans are striving for. So I really enjoy being in the States.
I used to live in Australia for 2 years. I came back like 6, 7 years ago. I didn't have a family back then. Now I do. But a few guys reached out to me on Twitter, inviting me back to living in Australia and building the holding company in Australia in Sydney. And to be honest, I don't really want to go. I really enjoy living where I live, doing what I do. So one of the things why I don't want to leave is pretty much my parents. So my question for you: how do you solve this part? I mean, don't you miss your parents? Are they in Europe or you brought them with you?
Yeah. So look, I think let's talk about the direct family, like my wife, my children, and so forth. They would always be always with me. Without them, I wouldn't go anywhere, or I would always want to be where they are, and that they are feeling at their best. That's the most important part. But regarding parents, it doesn't matter at all for me, at least. I mean, it's a long story, but I grew up without the father, so it doesn't exist. My mother, she's traveling a lot as well. She's like, yeah, do whatever's best for you, my son. I mean, she's an entrepreneur as well. I think everybody's high energy in my family, and I mean, we see each other relatively frequently, and if you don't see each other, then it doesn't matter either. It's everybody's just a high energy on the go kind of mentality.
Awesome. I just wanted to ask because this is something which holding me back to really probably moving to Australia or
You
US.
shouldn't.
But who
You
knows what
should.
the future holds? I just wanted
You
to ask
shouldn't. You
your
shouldn't.
advice.
You shouldn't. Look, I say to my kids, I mean, they're young, but one thing I wouldn't want to do is my children being held back from me
Hmm.
doesn't make sense. I mean, your parents did what they're supposed to do, which means, bringing you up and giving you all the principles. And now you should, just do whatever you want. And they should want you to do whatever you want because, it's about you now for them as well. At least that's how I would see it with my kids.
Yeah, they definitely don't hold me back. It's more about myself. They're not very old. They're in their 60s. We spend a lot of time together. But at the same time, opportunity wise, I know that what I want to build and what we're building, going to Australia or USA, it's a different world. In here, it's Europe is sleeping, like one guy said who was visiting me from. He's in United States, he's in London, and he said Europe is sleeping compared to US, for example.
Yeah, I think the US GDP will double in the next 10 years at least, and the European
Hmm.
GDP will stay flat at best.
Yeah. So if you can share, actually, no, I was asking about this, what you're gonna do next. So let's wrap up with the famous five. I've been really enjoying the show. So we've been doing that for 60 minutes already. So how old are you?
38.
Favorite book?
In general,
Yep.
3, 4, 2, 1.
Married, single, kids.
Married, 2 kids.
What car do you drive?
I'm a motorcycle guy. I drive a Harley Davidson Fat Boy.
What's the best investment advice you've ever got?
Investment advice: to build something rather than to build something instead of just investing.
And where can people find you if they want to ask more questions, introduce themselves, maybe ask something?
On Twitter or X and on LinkedIn.